The Chippy conversation is on Q&A, and they spend a little bit of time talking about a one-term government. Here's some facts and figures for you, Chewy, that came out during that conversation with old mate Jack Tame. There's only been 2 one-term governments in New Zealand, and the last one was 50 years ago. So when I say, statistically speaking, it's pretty unlikely that these guys are a one-term government, that's why. It hasn't happened for 50 years, and there's only been 2 in the history of this country. So they have that conversation, and then Hipkins and Jack start to have a conversation where they're talking, Chewy, about how to increase tax revenues.
You have made it clear, though, that a new tax policy is going to be critical to the next election campaign. I want to understand, do you think that our tax revenue as a whole needs to increase as a percentage of GDP, or do you simply think that our tax settings at the moment are unfair and some people should pay a bit more and some should pay a bit less?
It will depend on a number of factors. One will be population growth and the changing nature of demographics. So how fast the population grows and how fast the economy grows will determine the answer to the proportion of government spending as as a percentage of GDP.
Let's imagine for a moment that it's at about 2%, right? Which is where the forecast for growth are at the moment. So if it's at 2%, do you think in order to pay for the things that we need in the future, infrastructure, healthcare, all of that stuff with an aging population, we need to increase our tax revenue as a percentage of GDP?
But the big question mark is what happens with the working age population. So if the working age population stays the same and the population over the age of 65 grows, then yes, we will. We have to be honest about that. At the moment, so let's go back 10 years. There's 200,000 more people over the age of 65 than there were 10 years ago. There's another 400-odd thousand who are going to be there in the next 10 years. That means our population over the age of 65 will have gone from 14% to 21%. You can't say to people over the age of 65 that they can have everything that we gave to people when there were 14% of them, when there's 21%, and not increase government spending. The numbers just simply won't add up.
Right, and in order to increase government
spending...
This
is what we've said for quite a long time, the conversation around retirement age. And the answer, the point being, we cannot keep the retirement age where it is right now, funding it as we do right now. So we either need to put the retirement age up and continue to fund it as we're funding it right now, or we need to change the way we're funding it and leave it where it is. You can't keep funding the same and leave it the same. That option's already off the table, and I guess this is truly what they're kind of talking about here.
Spending, we'll get to debt in a moment and borrowing money, but we need to increase tax revenue as a percentage of GDP, as well as changing tax settings so that people who are earning wages, paying PAYE, aren't necessarily paying as much as a percentage of their wages, and we get tax revenue from other sources.
If we don't broaden New Zealand's tax base, the burden of all of that is going to fall on salary and wage earners and on GST, which is where the government gets most of its revenue at the moment. We're unique around the world in that regard. So if you look at other countries, they will have other forms of revenue. Now, we're not the only ones having this debate either. Nicola Willis is talking about new revenue measures. They're talking about a form of capital gains tax when it comes to funding their roads. They call it value capture. It's actually a form of capital gains tax.
Sure, but I mean, in order to be caught by a value capture tax, you actually have to be someone who has a house or a business near those new roads, right? So it's not a comprehensive capital gains tax.
No, but it does mean that they're having this debate as well. Yeah. They're also talking about how do you actually get more revenue for the government to do what it needs to do. The roads that they announced this week, there's billions of dollars that they're going to have to figure out how they pay for. They've put out billions of dollars worth of roads. Yeah. They don't know how they're going to pay for them yet. Now, that's either going to have to be increased user charges, because even if you, or some other form of tax.
We're here to talk about your policies, and we will, of course, have plenty of questions regarding those transport plans for the new government.
There you go. So Chippy started to get into election mode. Look, I think the one thing that they're not doing well enough right now, and we're about to go into a part of the conversation, Chippy, where they talk about capital gains tax, is I still feel like they're kind of going, well, we're working out our stuff now. It's like, you guys need to be in election mode now. If you want to see this as a first-term government, you should be going, yep, capital gains tax is on the way. We're going to do it. We haven't figured out all the details yet, whether we take it off family homes, whether we put it on family homes, but it's on the way. This sort of still middle grounding, they want to change the narrative around what they think about tax versus what National does without actually saying it now. It's almost a bit pointless. You know, anything to say from that first part of the conversation?
Yeah, a couple of things. It's nice to see an adult discussion about the fact that things need to change.
Yeah, for sure.
Like it's an acknowledgement that our demographics are changing and nothing is being done about it. And I'm glad to see that it is not a conversation of, yeah, maybe we need to put the retirement age up, because that affects a segment of our population that always gets shat on.
Yeah.
I think that as much as National are going to beat Labor around the head with talking about tax, whatever Labor do, National are going to beat them around the head for talking about tax. So just fucking talk about tax. Be the adults in the room and point out the fact that if you want roads, if you want infrastructure, you want hospitals, you want teachers and nurses and police to be paid better, it comes from tax. We all know this. And then point out to the fact that Bob, that might have a construction company with a few employees, is not going to get taxed out the arse. We're not after you. We're after the guys that are sitting on mountains of hoarded gold that aren't contributing as they can.
The next part of the conversation touches on that because it does delve into wealth tax, and I think he used the phrase wealth flight. But what we're saying here is don't let National set the narrative around this.
No.
Because Labor, if you don't come out, Greens, if you don't come out, actually, we don't worry about the Greens because they do come out. So it's really Labor. Labor, if you don't come out with a decisive position on these things, then National, like they did with Three Waters, like they did with 15-year-olds and their results at school, will set the narrative. They'll blame you, and then you'll be behind the 8 ball for the rest of the cycle. Now, you need to come out and set the narrative and say, yep, we are definitely going to have some kind of capital gains tax, or yep, we are definitely going to have some kind of, or say the opposite. I mean, I would certainly lean towards saying that you were, but the decisiveness. So then when National goes, oh, we know what they're planning a capital gains tax, and it's your family batch, and it's not going to be, you don't have to go, well, we haven't made a decision yet. You've put something in the ground, you put a stake in the ground, and you've said it, you've been decisive, and you are setting the narrative. That's really important.
Like that interview, to my knowledge at least, is the first time that I have heard a politician describe the bright line test as capital gains tax.
Yeah.
Because everyone was crawling over themselves to avoid saying capital gains tax. So that seems to be a change to me.
Yeah. Well,
and then the other thing, talking about wealth flight, where are these guys going to go?
Yeah. Well,
because
that's the question.
Everywhere clips the ticket.
Yeah. Yep. And as Chippy just said there, we're almost a unique country that we don't have some of these other forms of taxes. So you're right. Unless they were to go to the Bahamas and put it in some kind of offshore dodgy whatever. But this next part of the conversation, they are talking about capital gains tax. And how maybe the influence, like if you put a capital gains tax on today, you may not see the results or the influence financially from that for a decade from now. So what do? Do you backdate it? Does everyone who sells their house now pay capital gains tax versus what they bought it? Do you start it from now? So this is based on this valuation. So how do you do it basically? And is that going to be a problem? Which I guess is still what they're working out.
CGT, for example, if you were to introduce a CGT, unless you make it retroactive, you're likely not going to be receiving the billions of dollars you need to pay for all that new stuff for at least 5, probably 10 years, right? Well, by which time, let's be honest, let's look at the political cycles, you could be voted out and that tax could be removed.
Very much depends on how you structure a new form of taxation, whether it's capital gains tax, wealth tax. There's a range of different options. Very much depends how you structure those.
But you would agree that that's the downside to a capital gains tax,
well, I think we've got to take a longer term view of our tax base in New Zealand, and that means not just making decisions around what's going to be the most financially advantageous in the shortest term, but actually thinking about what's going to be sustainable for the country over the longer term.
Sure, but you also need to make it politically palatable. And if you can't say that these billions of dollars that we're using to pay for this new hospital or to pay for this fancy new road have come from that tax that we introduced, you're going to be voted out.
Well, actually, no, because I think you can look at it another way and say we're going to have to upfront fund a number of areas of investment. So to rebuild our hospitals, to rebuild our schools, to build all these roads, to build the public transport that we need, we're going to have to at least part fund that through borrowing. And sorry.
Take a drink of water. I'm going to ask you this. Would you agree that a retroactive capital gains tax is likely to be both administratively burdensome?
I don't think a retrospective one would work. So what he's basically saying is, Chewy, let's just say you spent $500,000. That's what the house cost you, right? And then you sold it in 3 years from now for $750,000. Then you've got that $250,000 as your capital gains to be taxed on. But you know, some of these houses were bought in the 1980s and the 1970s. People are still living in those sorts of places. It feels like if you were going to do it, it would have to start now. From the next time you sell the house, that would be point one, and then go onwards. And you wouldn't see the financial benefits from that for maybe 5 or 10 years. And then there's also going to be a whole bunch, like if you, I don't know, people who get given houses by family, it's not bought, it's not paid for. I don't know. Just seems retrospectively does seem more difficult to you. You got any thoughts?
My thoughts are to keep it as simple as possible. I think the moment that you see carve-outs and that sort of thing, then you have a way for people to exploit loopholes. So I don't know. Can we keep it simple that if you make money, then the money is taxed? One of the things that they always hold up about GST is that it's a simple tax to administer because it's on everything.
Everything, yeah.
Right. So the less complicated that you make it, then the easier it is to enforce, the easier it is for people to stay within the lines.
Yeah.
So
no.
Look, I'm not an economist, I'm not a tax expert, but that
aren't you?
No, I'm not.
I thought you were an economist. Okay, well, let's just see what Chewy's got to say. Let's see what what Chippy's got to say about this when it comes to retrospective or starting from now.
And politically untenable.
I mean, look, I don't want to announce.
We don't have a policy. We all know that.
The policy
but would you agree with that in principle?
But one of the debates is really, if you're going to have some form of capital or wealth taxation, then are you applying that based on realised gains? If they're realised gains, realised from what date? You know, when does it start? So those are all the things that we will be working through to answer as we design up the proposal that we put before the country.
But I'm just talking about the capital gains tax, and I agree that the unrealised versus realised gains is an important part of any policy development. But would you agree with that point on what we think of as a comprehensive capital gains tax, that applying it retroactively is likely to be politically untenable?
Well, if we were going to go down the capital gains tax route, I think there's two things that you would have to decide around that. One would be, are you applying that only to goods purchased after the date that the tax was introduced, or are you applying it from a certain date? So effectively a valuation date. That's one of the substantive choices that you'd need to make in designing that. Now, as I've said, we haven't landed exactly on what that's going to look like.
Yep, we know that. Wealth tax. What is the downside to a wealth tax?
Well, one of the challenges of New Zealand's one of the only countries in the world doing it, then you run the risk of wealth flight. So people will...
But we wouldn't be one of the only countries in the world doing it. That's the point. I'm interested as to why Labor still seems to be quite nervous about the idea of wealth tax. He's basically said, but if we're the only ones doing it, they take their money elsewhere. But we're not the only ones doing it. Lots of countries do it.
Literally take their money and put it somewhere where they're not going to pay a wealth tax. Whereas a capital gains tax is more, is slightly cleaner in that regard. There's also issues around it, again, valuation. So how you would value and how you would, make sure that was robust. But again, there are answers to these questions, and we're working through what choices we're going to make in terms of what we put before the electorate.
There you go, Joey. Thoughts, sir?
Wealth flight. New Zealand named among world's top safe haven for millionaires.
Because we don't have it.
That's why we have Silicon Valley tech libertarians coming here to build bunkers and shit like that, because we've shown that we'll let them buy citizenship. We've shown that we won't tax them too hard because you might take your money somewhere else. Like when they're talking about this wealth flight, we are talking about people that are hoarding their money. They're not investing it in productive New Zealand industries. They're not moving the needle for our economy. They're just sitting on their money.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're buying up property, because property always goes up. But it's not productive. It's all fake. It's all false. And if someone wants to, like if the Mowbrays want to pack up their paper money and fuck off somewhere else, that place will tax the shit out of them.
Well,
because all of these countries have realized that that's how they've got lots of money. They've got more money than anybody else. We're going to take some more, comparatively more than someone that doesn't make a lot of money. And we're talking literal millionaires. And the biggest thing that works for this, whenever they talk about tax, is parties like National and ACT will turn to people that are doing okay, just okay, and say, Labor's coming for your hard-earned money.
Mm.
And they're not. They're coming for their boss's boss's boss. They're coming for his money. And if they take more, they're still shopping in a supermarket we're not even allowed to see. They're living in mansions that we're not allowed to go near. They are driving cars that we might be able to see in the street, but we'll never sit in. Those guys are doing fine. And today's stuff, there was who was it? Was it Main Freight? There was a millionaire from Main Freight that goes, well, actually, yes, I think we should be taxed a lot more. And he's worth just over $1 billion or something like that. Because he knows it's not going to change his. It's not going to change his lifestyle.
Does he want to invest in a young startup? Like, I mean, have you got his name?
Does he want to buy a couple of ferries? Look, and this is in that story, and I'm just looking for the story. I can't find it on stuff. One of the things that his mates that he hobnobs with, and they have lovely get-togethers, I'm sure, is that they're concerned that a government will squander their money, as if that makes them different from any other taxpayer in this country.
Yeah.
But I would say that my concerns that a government might squander the money, like by paying a Korean shipbuilding company a whole bunch of money for doing nothing, for paying a lot of my taxpayers money for scrapping projects and giving this country nothing in exchange, for downgrading the hospital that serves my area. Those are my concerns, because that's a hospital that I will have to use. That's a ferry that I might have to use. These guys, they don't have to worry about that. They're not going to a public hospital. It's just like my concerns about my tax dollars being squandered comparatively should have more weight than Johnny Millionaire in his mansion that can just go fly off to a private fucking island. That's when you get concerned about your money being squandered, when you struggle to make your rates payments.
Yes, I agree. Kooky has a late fee. Thank you for the super chat. Peter, thank you for the super chat. Until 2020, a single party MMP government was unprecedented. Just because something is rare doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I agree, Peter, but that's why I just play the statistical chances. Statistically,
I think when you mention statistically it's unlikely, right? That's not to say it's too hard, don't try.
No, absolutely not.
We need to try really, really hard. We need to convince as many people as possible.
I play poker, right? Love playing poker, and I watch a lot of poker on YouTube primarily. And when you're watching it on TV, they have the odds that come up beside the hand, right? It says, "Oh, the aces versus kings. Kings have only got a 30% chance of winning." That hand wins 1 in 3 times. Just because statistically speaking, aces is going to beat kings, 1 in 3 times kings will beat aces. So statistically doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It means if you lined 100 elections up against the wall, there would be more where there wouldn't be a one-term government and less where there would be. But they're still there. There's just less of them.